The wind carried dust like smoke across the single street of Raven's Hollow. Sunlight bled against wooden storefronts and crooked signs, while the sound of spurs striking dirt echoed sharp and lonely. In that heat, a shadow larger than most, men's fell across the stables. Elias Boone. The people of Raven's Hollow called him many things: ox, mule, mountain with no brain. His broad shoulders seemed built for carrying boulders, not words. He moved slow, deliberate, always hunched like he was trying to make himself smaller. Though at nearly 7 feet tall, there was no hiding him. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel and tap the bell icon. Stories like this deserve to be remembered. Children threw stones at his boots when he walked by. "Careful! The giant'll step on you," they cried, laughter sharp as broken glass. The men laughed louder, slapping their knees, while women whispered that no man so big could have a gentle soul. They said he must have broken necks somewhere, in Texas, or carried chains in some border prison. Elias said nothing. He lifted hay bales. He shoveled manure. He drank water from the trough when no one was watching. He endured, because silence was safer than anger. But silence could not keep the memories out. When the horses slept, Elias sometimes heard it again. The thunder of rifles on the Rio Grande, the screaming of women caught in crossfire, the sight of his own hand steady on the trigger. He had been a hired gun once. He had killed for men who promised him bread and whiskey. Now he carried that weight like a stone inside his chest. Raven's Hollow only saw the giant body, never the broken man. The stagecoach rattled into town near noon, kicking up a storm of dust. From its back step climbed a girl in a faded bonnet, no older than 17. She carried a small satchel, worn thin, and her shoes were meant for walking roads far kinder than the desert trail she had just crossed. Her name was Clara May. She had been bound east once, to relatives who promised care, but instead sold her. Passage west with a single trunk of clothes and a note that said, "She is no longer our burden." Now she stood in Raven's Hollow, a stranger without a home. The townsfolk gave her quick glances, then turned away. An orphan was worth little in a place where survival depended on blood ties and cattle brands. Already the general store owner muttered about hiring her for scraps. Already the saloon keeper's wife whispered she'd be married off before spring, to whichever rancher needed a body more than a partner. Clara lifted her chin. She would not beg, and that was when she saw him. Elias Boone was bent over the trough, sleeves rolled high, arms thick as tree trunks as he pulled water for the horses. His hat shadowed half his face, but the sight of him froze her breath. Not from fear, though the sight of him could shake most men, but from recognition. He looked like someone who understood being alone. The children mocked again, circling him with sticks. "Dance, giant! Dance, or we'll burn your boots!" Elias stood still, jaw set, eyes dark with the weight of enduring. He didn't move, didn't fight, didn't raise his voice. And then, as if he felt her eyes on him, he looked up. For the briefest heartbeat, Clara saw something no one else noticed. Gentleness, buried deep beneath years of scars. Not kindness, without weight, but the kind forged through suffering. The mockers didn't see it. The town didn't see it. But she did. And though her heart trembled, Clara May felt the first flicker of connection. A strange, forbidden recognition between an orphan girl with nowhere to go and a giant cowboy everyone mocked but never understood. The desert wind swept between them, carrying the smell of dust, horses, and heat. A silence, heavier than any insult, bound the moment. Raven's Hollow was a cruel town. It fed on weakness, turned loneliness into spectacle. But the girl's eyes lingered on the giant long after the others laughed. She saw not a brute, but a man with a shadowed soul, and in that, something stirred, something dangerous, something the town would not forgive. And somewhere deep inside Elias Boone, beneath the weight of shame and memory, something long buried, shifted at the sight of her. The first spark of being seen. The giant, mocked and broken, had been noticed by the orphan girl. The story of survival, love, and redemption had begun. The desert sun was sinking low, pouring fire across the horizon. The streets of Raven's Hollow stretched quiet, painted in red dust and long shadows. Clara May carried her small parcel of flour and salt from the market. Her bonnet tilted to shield against the dry wind. She walked with her chin high, though her hands trembled. Behind her, boots scraped on gravel. Then came laughter, low, mocking, the kind that had corners sharp enough to cut skin. 2 cowhands staggered from the saloon, half drunk, half starved for cruelty. They weren't much older than boys, but whiskey had burned the youth from their eyes, their hats tilted back, their mouths curled with arrogance. "Well now," one drawled, stepping into her path. "What's this pretty little bird doing alone in the desert wind?" Clara tried to pass, clutching her parcel close, but the second man reached out and caught her sleeve. The fabric tore with a sound that startled her heartbeat into a gallop. The street around them stayed still. Shopkeepers pretended to stack crates. A woman closed her shutters with deliberate slowness. The sheriff was nowhere to be seen. Raven's Hollow had decided to look away. "Don't be shy," the first man laughed. "A girl's gotta earn her place out here. Maybe you start tonight." Clara's breath caught. Her father's voice rose, from memory. "Don't let them see fear, Clara. Fear gives men their power." She straightened her back, forcing steadiness. "Let me pass," she said. The cowhands only grinned wider. One reached for her hair, and then a shadow fell over all 3 of them, Elias Boone. He had been carrying feed sacks from the stable, moving slow and silent as always. But when he saw Clara pinned in the street, something old and heavy in him broke loose. His boots hit the ground like thunder. His frame swallowed the last of the sunlight, a tower of muscle and quiet rage. "Let her go." His voice was low, steady, carrying no shout, yet it struck like a rifle crack. The first cowhand froze. The second laughed nervously, trying to cover, the sudden prick of fear rising in his throat. "Well, look who it is. The giant mule." He spat into the dust. "Thought you was only good for shoveling dung, Boone. What you care about this little stray?" Clara stood rigid, caught between terror and relief. She saw the veins in Elias's forearms, the slow clench of his jaw. Something dangerous trembled beneath his calm. "I said," Elias repeated, stepping closer. "Let her go." The cowhand holding Clara's sleeve hesitated, then shoved her back with a sneer. She stumbled but did not fall. The parcel burst. Open, flour spilling across the dirt like pale smoke. "See?" The drunk laughed. "No harm done." But Elias kept coming. The first blow came fast. Elias's hand shot out like a hammer, gripping the man's collar and lifting him off the ground as though he weighed nothing. Dust spun around them as the cowboy's boots kicked uselessly in the air. The second reached for his pistol, but Elias swung the first man aside like a rag doll, knocking them both into the trough. Water sloshed, wood splintered, curses flew. For a heartbeat, the whole town seemed to hold its breath. This was the giant they whispered about. The man who once drew guns on the border. The beast they feared would break loose one day, and now he had. The cowhands scrambled to their feet, dripping and furious. But one look into Elias's dark, steady eyes made their bravado falter. They muttered curses, staggering back toward the saloon, wet and beaten, but alive. The silence they left behind was heavier than gunpowder smoke. Elias turned then, slowly, carefully, as if his own strength frightened him more than it did the others. His gaze fell on Clara. "You hurt?" His voice, rough but gentle, cracked something inside her chest. She shook her head, though her torn sleeve told the truth. I'm fine," she whispered. But her eyes betrayed her, wide, unblinking, filled with both fear and gratitude. Elias bent down, gathering what was left of her parcel. Flour clung to his hands like chalk. He held it out awkwardly, as though afraid she would recoil from his touch. She did not. Instead, her hand brushed his, light as bird wings, as she took the bundle. For an instant, their eyes met. His full of guilt, hers full of something she could not yet name. The townsfolk finally found their voices, whispering, "See? He's dangerous. Told you the giant's temper would spill blood. Girl's a fool to stand near him." Clara heard them, but their words seemed far away. All she could see was the man before her. Not a monster, not a brute, but a shield. For the first time since being abandoned in Raven's Hollow, she did not feel entirely alone. As the sun dipped behind the desert ridge, its last fire turned, the street red. Elias lifted his hat, nodded once, and stepped back toward the stables. His shadow stretched long, almost endless, across the dust. Clara watched him go, the torn fabric on her arm fluttering in the evening wind. Something dangerous had just begun, something the town would not forgive, but something her heart could no longer deny. The desert had burned her world to ash, but now, in the shape of a giant cowboy, she had glimpsed a strange kind of salvation. The stable smelled of hay, leather, and quiet. Horses shifted in their stalls, their breath rising in soft white plumes against the cold dawn air. Elias Boone stood with a pitchfork in hand, his massive frame bent over the straw, moving with the slow rhythm of a man who'd learned silence was safer than words. And then he heard the lightest sound: bare feet on wood. Clara May stood in the doorway, bonnet pushed back, a small lamp in her hand. Her eyes searched the shadows until they landed on him. For a moment, she said nothing, only held her breath like someone trespassing on sacred ground. "You shouldn't be here," Elias muttered, his voice gravel-soft, his gaze fixed on the straw. "Neither should you," she answered quietly, stepping inside. "But here we are." She came at first only to watch. She'd sit on an overturned bucket, hugging her knees, speaking in fragments. Elias rarely looked at her, yet somehow, her presence filled the space like a warm fire in winter. On the second morning, she asked to help. He hesitated. Her hands were too fine, too small. But when she reached for the brush and began working the bay mare's coat with slow, careful strokes, he let her. They worked in silence, two shadows moving among horses, the lantern light bending against their faces. Clara broke the quiet first. "My uncle used to say I wasn't fit for ranch work. Said a girl's only worth is what she can fetch in a marriage," Elias grunted, setting the fork aside. "Your uncle's a fool." She smiled faintly. He thought himself a wise man. "Sold me to a wagon headed west like he was trading a sack of grain." Something in Elias's chest clenched. He looked at her then, really looked, and saw the sharp defiance in her eyes. She wasn't fragile, not the way the town imagined. She was steel wrapped in skin, bruised but unbroken. Days folded into one another. Clara returned when the town slept or when chores allowed her escape. She asked questions about the land, about the horses, about the endless silence of the desert. Elias answered in low fragments. "The land don't bend, you bend to it. Horses listen better than people. Silence is a man's only friend if he's got blood on his hands." The last slipped out before he could stop it. Clara froze, brush stilling mid-stroke. "You've killed," she whispered, not as accusation but as fact. Elias's jaw worked. His gaze drifted to the far wall, to a place memory still lived. "It was border work," he said at last. "Settlers against tribes, ranchers against ranchers. Men with silver in their pockets needed guns, and I was too young to know the weight of saying yes." He paused, voice low. "One night, smoke, fire, screaming. I pulled the trigger and a man dropped. He had a child clinging to his leg. I swore I'd never draw again." Clara set the brush down. Her chest rose and fell quick, but her voice came steady. "And yet they mock you. Call you brute. They don't know you're trying to carry what no man should." Elias shook his head. "Doesn't matter what they know. Sin don't wash away with silence." Clara stepped closer. For the first time her hand touched his arm, small against the bulk of him, trembling but certain. "Maybe not. But it matters that you stopped." The bond between them grew like water seeping into cracked earth, fragile, quiet, forbidden. The town whispered already about the orphan girl who lingered too near the stables, about the giant who looked at her with something close to softness. At night, Clara lay awake in her narrow cot, hearing the echo of Elias's voice. She had confessed more to him than to anyone. Her hunger for belonging, her fury at being treated as property, her terror of being auctioned into marriage with a man twice her age. Better to starve free than live caged, she had said. Once, her fists clenched tight. Elias had only nodded, but his silence was agreement. One evening, as the sun bled red over the horizon, Clara lingered in the doorway of the stable while Elias poured water into the trough. The light caught his face, rough-hewn, scarred by years, yet softer in that fading glow. "Do you ever wish," she asked, "you could start again? Be someone different?" Elias stared at the water, watching ripples spread. "Every day. But a man don't get to shed his past like a snakeskin." Clara's eyes burned with unshed tears. "Then maybe I'll carry it with you. Maybe you don't have to bear it alone." He turned, startled by the weight in her voice. For a moment, the air between them was heavy, dangerous, charged with something neither could name but both felt. He wanted to step closer. She wanted him to. But the world outside, the cruel laughter of the town, the weight of sin, the fragile line between girl and woman, stood like a canyon between them. So Elias only said softly, "You don't know what you're saying." Clara held his gaze. "I do." The horses shifted, the desert wind whistled through broken boards, and the moment passed. But in that silence, something undeniable had taken root, something that would not be buried, no matter how the town tried. Two outsiders, a giant cowboy, mocked as a monster, and a young orphan girl dismissed as a burden, had begun weaving something fragile, something forbidden, something that might destroy them both, or save them. And as the desert night fell, stars opening wide above ravens, hollow Clara May and Elias Boone stood together in the stable shadows, closer than either dared to admit. The sun hung low over the desert horizon, staining the sky in bruised shades of violet and rust. Dust swirled with each hoofbeat that echoed through the town's main street. Folks stopped what they were doing, eyes narrowing, lips pressing tight. Trouble had arrived, and they could smell it before they saw the men. Jeb Calhoun rode at the head of 5 men, his wide-brimmed hat shadowing a grin too sharp to be friendly. His horse was black as tar, nostrils flaring with each snort, and his coat carried the smell of whiskey and old gunpowder. Men like him didn't ride into town for supplies. They rode in to remind people of what fear tasted like. And for Elias Kane, it was a taste he had tried to spit out long ago. He was in the stables when the sound of those hoofbeats reached him, brushing down a nervous mare whose ears flicked toward the noise. His shoulders stiffened. It wasn't just any gang. He knew that rhythm, the arrogant rhythm of Jeb's ride. Clara, who had been sweeping hay into a corner, looked up at him. "You know them." Elias didn't answer. His jaw clenched, his hands tightening on the brush until the wood creaked. The saloon doors swung open as Jeb strutted in, his men scattering to lean on posts, or tie their horses loose as if they owned the street. The piano player stopped mid-note. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. It didn't take long before Jeb came looking. He always did. His boots crunched on gravel as he crossed to the stables, a cigarette burning between his fingers. "Well, I'll be," Jeb drawled, stopping in the doorway. His grin spread wide. "If it ain't Elias Kane, the biggest ghost the West ever spat out, hiding in hay and horse piss." Clara froze, broom in hand. Elias stepped forward, placing himself between her and Jeb without even thinking. "Turn around, Jeb," Elias said, his voice low, carrying the weight of a warning that only men who had killed before could give. But Jeb wasn't here to be warned. He chuckled, flicking ash into the straw. "You remember, don't you? That border camp. The settlers. The redskins. You had your gun out, same as me. Only difference is, you blinked. You couldn't finish the work." Clara's throat tightened. She didn't understand all the words, but she understood enough. Elias's silence had always carried shadows. Now those shadows had a name. Jeb stepped closer, smoke curling around his face. "Tell me, Kane. You think mucking stables makes you clean? You think hiding behind a little slip of a girl makes you different?" His eyes flicked to Clara, and his grin sharpened. "Careful. Folks might talk." Elias's hand twitched, a reflex born from years of drawing iron faster than thought. But he caught himself. His promise bound him tighter than chains. Jeb saw it. He leaned in, voice dropping. "The man I rode with is still in you." You can't scrub blood off your hands. Brother, you can only add more. Then, with a laugh like gravel, he turned and sauntered out, leaving the air thick with his poison. When the stables were quiet again, Clara stood in the dust, staring at Elias. Her hands trembled, but her voice didn't. What did he mean? Elias leaned against a post, shoulders heavy as if the years he had outrun had finally caught him. He meant the truth. I rode with him once. Too long ago, but not long enough. We took jobs. We didn't ask questions, until one day the question couldn't be ignored. His eyes darkened, lost in the memory. They wanted me to kill children. I couldn't. So I walked away. But walking doesn't erase where I've been. Clara's heart pounded. She stepped closer, her voice raw. You didn't kill them. That matters. He shook his head, almost laughing without humor. Matters. To who? This town sees me as a brute. Jeb sees me as a coward. And me, his voice broke into gravel. I see every face I failed to protect. Every shot I did take. My hands don't come clean, Clara. Silence filled the stable, broken only by the restless shifting of horses. Clara laid the broom aside and dared to take another step toward him. All my life, she whispered. Men have tried to decide what I am. An orphan to be pitied, a girl to be married off, a servant to be bought. But you. Her eyes shone, fierce and wet. You never once told me who I had to be. You. Let me breathe. You stood between me and the fire. Elias looked down at her, his massive frame casting her in shadow. You don't understand. If you stay near me, you'll carry that same shadow. Then let me choose it, she said, her voice trembling but unbroken. Because I see you. Elias, not the monster, not the outlaw, the man who said no when it mattered most. For a moment, the air between them quivered like the desert before a storm. His hand rose halfway, as if to touch her cheek, then fell, trembling, to his side. Their bond was a knife's edge, sharp, forbidden, and yet the only thing keeping either of them alive. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. From the upstairs window of the boarding house, she saw the glow of the outlaws' campfires outside town, embers pulsing against the black of the desert. Jeb wasn't done. His kind never was. And in the stables, Elias sat in the dark, oiling, a gun he swore never to use again. His reflection wavered in the steel, his face older, heavier, broken by memory. The wind howled across the empty street, carrying with it the smell of dust, ash, and storm. Shadows of the past had returned, and this time, they demanded blood. The sun had not yet risen, but its promise painted the horizon in faint gold when Clara returned to the stables. Elias was still there, slumped on a stool, the revolver in his lap. He looked up at her, eyes hollow. You should stay away, Clara. She shook her head, standing tall in the doorway. No. Running from who you were doesn't free you. Facing it does. Don't let men like Jeb write your story. Her words struck deeper than any bullet. For the first time, Elias's shoulders straightened. Not as a monster, not as an outlaw, but as a man who might yet choose his own name. The horses stirred, restless, as the desert light spilled in, painting them both in fire and shadow. The town of Raven's Hollow woke to fire in the streets. A wagon lay overturned, its wheels still spinning. A shop window shattered under a boot heel. Laughter, drunk, cruel, echoed through the morning dust. Jeb Calhoun's gang had claimed, the town is theirs, and no lawman dared lift a hand. Sheriff Morgan sat slumped on the boardwalk outside his office, hat pulled low, a bottle glinting in his hand. Folks peeked from shutters but didn't step into the street. Fear kept them indoors. Fear had become the town's master. And in the stables, Elias Kane strapped on his old gun belt with a silence heavy as thunder. Clara found him there, the morning, light catching the steel at his hip. You're going out, she said, her voice half a whisper, half a challenge. Elias didn't look at her. His hands moved with deliberate calm, checking the cylinder, tightening the leather. They'll keep burning this town until someone stops them. Someone? Clara stepped closer, fire in her eyes. It has to be you. He turned then, his massive frame filling the stall, shadow cutting across her face. "You don't understand. Every bullet I fire takes me back to who I was, to what I swore I'd never be again." Clara's chin lifted. "And what about me? They'll come for me too. For every girl with no father to protect her. For every widow with no husband left. If you stand, I stand with you. Don't you dare ask me to hide." Her defiance struck deeper than any outlaw's threat. Elias's breath caught, and for the first time, he let her see the flicker of fear in his eyes. Not for himself, but for her. By late afternoon, the gang had the town corralled. Like cattle, merchants stood in a line, tossing coins into a sack while Jeb leaned lazy against a post, grinning wide. His men strutted through the street, pistols flashing in the sun, knocking hats from heads and kicking over barrels for sport. The air was heavy with heat and silence, broken only by the groan of wagon wheels and the whinny of a frightened horse. Then a sound cut through it all, the slow, deliberate thud of boots on dirt. Elias Kane walked into the street. Dust curled around each step, sunlight carving his frame in gold and shadow. Clara followed, her shawl wrapped tight, her face unflinching despite the whispers that rippled from doorways. Fool girl. Sinful girl. God help her. But Clara didn't falter. She walked beside him, as if daring the town to call her less than his equal. Jeb's laughter cracked the silence. Well, well, the ghost found his gun, and he brought the little orphan with him. What's the matter? Kane couldn't face me alone? Elias's voice rolled low, steady as the desert wind. This ends today. The street became a stage. The sun sank lower, staining the sky in blood-orange hues. Shadows stretched long, wrapping the town in twilight. Every window held a watcher. Every breath waited for the first shot. Jeb flicked his cigarette into the dust. "You think you've got the stomach for it still? I remember your hand shaking last time." Elias's hand hovered near his revolver, but his eyes never wavered. "I'm not here for revenge, Jeb. I'm here to stop you." That was enough to draw bloodlust from the gang. Two men moved first, guns flashing from their holsters. The world slowed. The sharp crack of Elias's revolver split the air, echoing off the storefronts. One man fell, his pistol clattering to the dirt. Elias's other hand swung like an iron hammer, knocking the second man cold before his finger could even squeeze the trigger. Dust rose in choking clouds. Horses reared. Screams pierced the silence. Clara stood firm, her fists clenched, her eyes never leaving Elias. Then came Jeb. He strode into the center of the street, gun drawn, teeth bared in a grin that was more snarl than smile. The two men circled, years of history burning between them like dry timber. "You should have stayed my brother," Jeb spat. "We could have owned every mile between the rivers." "I'd rather die clean than live filthy," Elias growled. The guns rose. For a heartbeat, the desert held its breath. Then fire exploded from the barrels. The sound tore through the town, rattling windows and shaking bones. Jeb staggered, clutching his arm where Elias's bullet had torn through flesh. But Jeb didn't fall. With a roar, he charged, tackling Elias into the dust. The two men wrestled, fists pounding, blood spraying, boots kicking up storms of sand. The townsfolk gasped, riveted, powerless. Clara ran forward, but stopped short as Elias's massive frame pinned Jeb at last, his hand closing around the outlaw's throat. One squeeze, one twist, and it would be over. "Do it!" Jeb spat blood, laughing through his broken teeth. "Be the killer I always knew you were!" Elias's face twisted in fury, his knuckles whitened. His breath came ragged. For a moment, the monster Jeb claimed lived in him flickered to life. But then, Clara's voice cut through the chaos. "Elias!" He turned his head, meeting her eyes. They weren't afraid. They were pleading, demanding, reminding him of who he chose to be. Slowly, painfully, Elias released his grip. Jeb gasped, rolling onto his side, choking on dust. Elias rose, towering above him, gun in hand. But he didn't fire. He tossed the revolver into the dirt, its weight thudding like a coffin. "Lid, no more blood," he said, his voice carrying across the silent town. "Not today." The gang, leaderless, scattered. The sheriff finally stumbled out of his office, emboldened now that the danger had passed. Townsfolk crept into the street, their fear mingling with awe. Clara stepped to Elias's side, her hand brushing his arm. He didn't look at her, but the faintest tremor in his chest betrayed what her presence meant. Jeb was dragged away, cursing, bleeding, beaten but alive. For the first time, Raven's Hollow was free, not by the sheriff's hand, not by the town's courage, but by the man they once called a monster. As the sun bled into the horizon, Elias and Clara stood in the settling dust, the whole town watching, judging, whispering. But in that light, the two of them seemed untouchable, an orphan girl and a broken giant, bound by something no law could name. The wind carried the smell of blood and gunpowder away, leaving only silence. The silence of a town that would never forget. The first light of dawn spilled over Raven's Hollow, washing the battered town in pale gold. The street that had been a battlefield hours earlier lay quiet now, its dust darkened with blood that the wind slowly carried away. The townsfolk emerged, one by one, their faces lined with exhaustion, shame, and something unfamiliar. Respect. Where once they had mocked the giant stablehand, they now looked upon Elias Kane with wary reverence. Mothers pulled their children close, but the insults that had once followed him like flies never came. Instead, there was only silence. Elias stood apart, shoulders bowed beneath the weight of what he had done, and what he had refused to do. He had not taken Jeb Calhoun's life, though every man in town expected it. That choice left him both freer and lonelier, as if he had stepped further into exile from the world he'd saved. Clara walked among the people, her shawl pulled tight against the chill. The whispers turned toward her now, some pitying, some condemning, others filled with awe. "That girl ought to be sent east," one woman murmured. "She belongs in a proper home," another said. But Clara lifted her chin, her gaze steady. When the preacher approached, offering to arrange her passage back east to distant kin, Clara shook her head. Her voice, though soft, carried like a bell. "I will not be sent anywhere. My place is here. My choice is mine." It was the first time Raven's Hollow had truly seen her, not as an orphan to be passed along, but as a soul who refused to be owned. As the sun rose higher, the town began to mend itself. Boarded windows replaced, ash swept from porches, wagon, wheels righted. But Elias remained by the stables, leaning against the post where he had stood so many times in solitude. Clara found him there. She stopped a step away, studying his profile. The scar across his jaw, the shadows under his eyes, the way his massive hands hung as if they were made for holding burdens too heavy for anyone else. "You didn't kill him," she said. Elias kept his gaze on the horizon. "Killing him would have been easy. Easier than walking away." She nodded. "That's why you're not what they call you. That's why I stayed." His head turned then, slowly, as if her words carried more weight than any bullet he'd faced. "You should have gone, Clara. You deserve better than this broken place. Better than me." Her eyes held his without flinching. "Maybe. But I don't want better. I want real. I want someone who knows what it means to lose, and still stands. That's you." The silence between them was not empty. It was full. Of things unsaid. Of choices made in fire and dust. Of a bond no preacher's blessing or town decree could ever define. They stood together at the stable door as the morning spread over the land. Horses shifted inside, the smell of hay and leather rising in the cool air. Beyond, the desert stretched endless, cruel, and beautiful. Clara leaned against the post beside him. For the first time since she had arrived in Raven's Hollow, she felt no fear of where she belonged. Elias let out a long breath, the kind a man releases when he realizes he has survived both death and the weight of his own heart. No vows were spoken, no promises carved into words, but the way they stood, side by side, orphan girl and giant cowboy, was its own defiance. A fragile promise of healing, of kinship, of something deeper that the world would never fully understand. As the sun climbed higher, the town stirred to life behind them, but Elias and Clara did not move. They watched the horizon in silence, as if the land itself bore witness to the truth they carried. The wind stirred Clara's hair across her cheek. Elias reached out, not to claim, not to cage, but to gently brush it back. The gesture was small, but in the harsh world of the West, it was everything. The giant mocked by all, and the orphan cast aside had forged a home, not of walls and roofs, but of choice, defiance, and the quiet strength to stand together. That was my story. If it reached you, tell me what you felt. Don't let silence bury us again. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and tell me where in the world you're listening from.